Hello and welcome back, Charlotte here with a video for Love From Lizi, and today I'm going to be showing you my 10 cards 1 kit with the July card kit. Before I jump into showing you the cards, I'm just going to quickly show you what I made with the Never Ending stamp set. So I have two panels I made with black ink and coloured. One I coloured completely and the other I coloured with spotlight stamping. Two more panels I used with barely beige ink, one for no line watercolouring and one for a tone on tone look, and then two panels used embossing ink, one of which I clear heat embossed on craft and did the emboss resist technique, and the other one I did the pigment powder lifting technique. And if you'd like to see in more detail how I made those, I do have a video on my channel showing those, so that will be linked up in the top right hand corner as well as down below if you'd like to check that out. So then I will get on with showing you my cards that I made. For my first card I'm going to start by using one of the decoupage pieces. I used several of these in my cards, not necessarily all in their entirety, some I use just pieces of them. I won't show you assembling all of them, but I am going to show just a little bit of the assembly here on this first one. I'm using the foam squares that also came in the kit, and I'm putting those on the back of each element in turn and laying them in place. I like to use quite a lot of foam because I want to really support the images. And if you are not sure which piece goes where, the sheet that you pop them out of does have numbers for them, but if for some reason you've popped them all out and no longer have that sheet, basically you want to put the largest images at the back and you're working towards the more detailed ones. And you may have noticed that this one I didn't use the second layer. I put that aside and I'm going to be using it on my next card. So you don't necessarily have to use all the pieces of the decoupage for building your image. I have a piece of one of the pattern papers that's going to be my back panel for this card, and I've trimmed it down to be just smaller than my card base. And then I'm using some of the narrow yellow ribbon that came in the kit, and I'm just going to wrap that around the pattern paper panel and adhere it in place on the back with some double-sided tape. I then added some Tombow Mono Multi liquid glue all over the back of the panel, and I will adhere that to my red card base, and then more Tombow on the back of the oval, the decoupage piece, and press that over the ribbon. I did make sure I had the card the right way up first. I made a double bow to go on my card. I did it off camera because it took me quite a while fiddling and you probably didn't want to sit through watching all of that. And I'm using some more Tombow to adhere that into place. A glue dot would work better for that, but I do not have glue dots. As a final touch, I'm using some Nuvo drops in Simply White, and I'm putting them all over the little dots that are on the decoupage image. And that completes my first card. My second card, as I said, is using the second layer of decoupage from that first one, and I wanted to make a shaker with this. So I cut a piece of vellum using a Lawn Fawn stitched oval die, which was almost the same size. Actually, it was enough different that it became a bit fiddly, so I think it would have been better to just roughly freehand it, but I thought I was saving myself time by using this die. It doesn't matter, it wasn't too much of a difference, but it did get a little bit fiddly. So I used Glossy Accents to adhere the decoupage piece to my vellum, which is going to be the window of my shaker. I decided to use vellum just to mute the background panel a bit, and I'm using the ice cream patterned paper for the background panel. I used foam strips all around the back of the shaker to create the shaker well. I'm using the Summer Sprinkles sequins in the shaker, and I just adhered the pattern paper onto the back of it to close it all up. And then I will work on my backing panel, and I'm using a similar pattern paper to the one I used on the first one. I really liked these ones with the dottiness alongside the ice cream images. So just to add some interest to it, I put some of the Candy Floss pink peel-offs all around the edge just to give a little bit of sparkle. And then I'm going to adhere it to my white card base with more of my Tombow Mono Multi glue. I'll use the glue again to adhere the shaker element onto the centre of the card, and it's a very similar layout to the first one. And I just weighed it down for a little while whilst the glue set. Then for my sentiment, I took a strip from a different decoupage piece. I'm adding some of the Derice strips on either end where it will not be overlapping the shaker panel, so that it will be popped up at the right height, and then some of the Tombow glue in the centre where it will overlap, just to make sure it adheres into place completely. And that finishes my second card. I lost a bit of footage at the beginning of card number 3, but I'm going to be using the sand to make some sand dunes. I cut some panels of craft card which I had put double-sided tape on. Then I'm going to remove the double-sided tape and press the sand into it. For the first one I poured the sand all over and then burnished it in, and for this second one, as I already had the sand on my scratch paper, I just kind of dipped the sand into it. The reason I used the craft cardstock is because it's already a kind of sandy colour, so any places that don't take the sand as well will still look consistently sandy. And then, much like with adding glitter onto double-sided tape, you want to burnish it well to make sure it stays in place. I'm going to add these sand dunes into a frame, and this frame is from another of the decoupage pieces. I decided I wanted to use it as a kind of standalone element. I kind of worked out how I want the dunes arranged inside the frame, and then I'm using Glossy Accents to adhere each of the sand dunes together. I chose Glossy Accents because it's nice and strong and I felt it would hold well against the textured sand. Whilst the sand dunes are drying, I'm going to work on my background. So I've masked off a white card base such that I'm only ink blending in the area that will be within my frame, and I'm just using a cloud mask and some Mermaid Lagoon Distress Oxide to create my background. A lighter blue would probably be better, but this is the only blue I have, so I used this. I did get a bit heavy-handed in places and I had to kind of go back and try to smooth it out a bit, but it looks fine in the end, so I don't think it matters too much. So I just kept working it until I was happy with how the clouds looked. Then I very carefully peeled off the washi tape I had used for my masking. You want to make sure you do this nice and slowly so that you don't rip the card base. Also, one good idea is that before you put the washi tape on, you just kind of press it against your hand or your clothes just to take up some of the stickiness from it so that it won't rip your card base as easily. So I'm just checking with my frame that it's all how I want and working out how far back I want my dunes to go. And then I'm going to use some Glossy Accents to adhere the bottom portion of the frame to the dunes, and off camera I will trim away the overlapping piece of the sand dunes, so the bits that are outside the frame I will trim away. I'm then adding a sentiment using MFT Black Licorice Hybrid ink. I actually realised I hadn't left enough space for the sentiment I wanted to use from the stamp set that came in the kit, so I pulled out one from my stash that worked. I put foam tape behind the top of the frame, and the bottom portion I just glued flat because the dunes gave enough dimension there already. And then I'm going to use one of the wood veneer pieces, the beach hut. The wood veneers in the kit did come with a little circle of foam tape on the back of them, so I peeled mine off and moved it so it would be where one of the sand dunes is, because it's kind of a shallower foam tape than the tape I'm using. And then I used my own foam tape for the top of the beach hut, which helped keep it all flat when I adhered it into place. And that completed my third card. I'm going for another beachy theme for card number 4, and this panel I'm using is actually the inner portion of the frame I used on the last card. So I popped that out and I'm using it for this one. And I'm using the Best Escape Anyone Can Have Beach sentiment, which is from the Let's Shellabrate stamp set. I stamped that onto the little panel and I'd measured it against the piece of beach hut ephemera that I want to use to make sure I had it in the right position. I've then cut a piece of the pattern paper with the adorable beach scene with all the cute little critters lounging on the beach, and that's cut to be just smaller than my card base, and I'm going to add the beach hut ribbon around this. Initially I had only adhered it at the back, but it was coming up a bit in the middle, so I did add some double-sided tape along the whole length that would be going along the front, and then I will adhere that back down a bit more securely than it would have been otherwise. And I do find it's very helpful to use the grid squares on my craft mat just to make sure everything is properly lined up. I don't always get it perfect, but it helps. Then I'll use my liquid glue again to adhere this panel directly to my white card base. I find the liquid glue is very good as it gives you a little bit of wiggle room before it sets into place, so you can make sure it's more or less even. I'm using my T-square ruler to help me line up my panel with the sentiment on, which I have put on foam tape. And actually the foam tape makes it a bit difficult to use with the T-square ruler, and it was only when I was making this video that I noticed it's actually not properly straight, but I don't think it's too noticeable. So then I have the ephemera beach hut, and I'm going to pop that up again, and that's popped up. So the bit overlapping the sentiment panel has one layer of foam tape, and the bit that overhangs has 2 layers of foam tape so that it remains level, which completes card number 4. Card number 5, I'm going to bring in one of those panels that I had made at the beginning with the Never-Ending stamp set. This is the one that I'd coloured in completely with my alcohol markers, and I'm going to use a piece of ribbon just to hide where I hadn't quite lined it up properly. It's not too obvious, but I just wanted to disguise it. Before adhering the ribbon into place, I'm using it as a guide so that I can see where to stamp my sentiment. I'm using the Let's Shellabrate sentiment because I thought it fit very well with the image, and I white heat embossed it. And then I'm going to carefully adhere the orange ribbon to go round behind the card, again using the double-sided tape on the back. And here again it was coming up a bit in the centre, which I didn't like, so I did add a dot of Glossy Accents in 2 places. It does leave a very slight mark which is noticeable through the ribbon. Here again, something like a very small glue dot or a tiny piece of double-sided tape would probably work better. I'm using one of the specialty papers for my card base, and this is the, I think it was blush colour, and this time I'm using double-sided tape instead of my liquid glue to adhere the panel into place. I find the best way to do this is just to peel the backing from the tape in one corner, carefully get it into place and press that corner down, and then you can just lift up the rest of the panel and pull the backing paper off the tape from underneath, and this way you should be able to get it fairly straight. And just to add a little something extra, I'm going to edge the panel with the Candy Floss Pink glitter peel-offs. So I will put that around all 4 edges and just trim off the excess pieces, which completes this card. I'm going to make another shaker card for my 6th card, and this one I'm using 2 of the panels with the Never-Ending stamping. The background of the shaker is going to be that same entirely coloured in piece, and then the front panel is tone on tone using Simon Says Stamp Barely Beige on white card, and I was very careful to cut them out so that the pattern will be lining up when I have the shaker assembled. I'm filling my shaker with a mixture of sand and also distress glitter dust in vintage platinum, so I used a spoon to help get those in. I think I actually used too much sand and possibly not quite enough glitter. The shaker's maybe a bit more full than I had originally intended, but I think it works well enough, so I'm not complaining. I'd only used 1 layer of foam tape here because I felt I didn't need a lot of space. The shaker material is very flat. I was very careful to make sure that all the foam tape was tightly together so that there are no gaps, because of course the sand and the glitter is very, very fine. If there are any gaps at all, it is going to escape. And when I assembled the front panel onto the back panel, I was again very careful because I want the pattern to be continuous, so I was very careful to make sure I had it lined up before I pressed it into place. I then adhered it to a blue card base, and that completed my shaker card. I'm again using the Never-Ending stamp for my 7th card, and this is the pigment powder lifting technique one, and again you can see that in the other video I made. You can see how to do that. It uses perfect pearls to get the sheen on the card, and then edging the panel, the bottom of the panel, with one of the peel-offs. I did actually consider getting one of the clear glitter peel-offs from my stash from a previous kit, but I thought I'd try and use the pink that came with this kit and see how it looks. And because it is clear, even though it does have the pinkish tone to it, being clear, it will work well on any colour you put it on. Like, it doesn't look oddly pink against this dark blue. I added my sentiment and I heat embossed it in steel navy embossing powder, which I felt fitted the colour of the panel well, and then I popped the panel up on foam tape, and that completed the card. This one has a really nice elegant look to it, and I think it's just a bit of a different look for the set. I went back to the decoupage for card number 8, and I'm going to be using an offcut of paper from the same paper I used on my first card. So I'm going to edge this panel with some of the peel-offs. Then I'm using the life ring panel as my background, so I cut that to be just smaller than my card base. I tend to cut 1/4 of an inch smaller on each side for these panels, so my card bases are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 and the panels are 4 by 5 1/4. I'll then adhere the long strip over the center and then add my decoupage piece over the top, and I did consider adding a sentiment or something to this, but I thought it looked fine as it was, so I decided to leave it. So that completes card number 8. Card number 9 is also going to use one of the decoupage pieces. This one I'm going to adhere to a piece of the green pattern paper to frame it, so I just carefully press that into place. I only wanted a very narrow frame. Ordinarily I would have gutted the center away from this so as not to waste that pattern paper, but for some reason I didn't this time. I'm then going to use the bubbles stencil and some white pigment ink to add some interest to my card base for the background of this decoupage. I didn't have any white pigment ink when I had this idea, so I went to a local craft shop to get some, and this was the only one they had, and at least so far I'm not overly impressed with it. It works, but it's not as bright a white as I would like. I do like how it looks on this card. It's a nice subtle pattern and I think it works for this card, but I would be very interested in finding a white pigment ink that gives a more opaque coverage. But I'm just using a sponge to sponge through the panel, the stencil, and add my bubbles onto the card, and I will turn each time I move the stencil so that the pattern is not too repetitive. And I'm also only adding the colour around the edge of the card because I don't need to do the centre because my decoupage piece is going to be in the centre. So I felt there wasn't any point taking the time to ink up the centre if it was just going to be covered up anyway. So here you can see how it looks when it's finished, and it is a very subtle effect which does work well with the decoupage, but as I said, I would maybe in future have a look for a more opaque pigment ink. So if you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear them down below. I'll adhere my decoupage piece over the centre of the panel, and then I will just finish it up by adding some of the Simply White Nuvo drops from the kit. And again, as I did on the first card, I'm just adding these over each of the dots that are in the background of the decoupage piece. For my final card, I decided to do something a little bit different and make a birthday card that's not quite such a beachy theme as the other cards. So I'm using a happy birthday die from the February card kit, and I've cut that from the same pattern paper that I used for my background panel, and I actually lined it up so that I could cut it in such a way that when I add it to the vellum that's going to be between it and the striped panel, that I can line it up perfectly with the stripes in the background. I just thought that would be a fun effect. I will try and find this in the Love From Lizi shop. I did have a look and I didn't manage to find it yet, but I'll have another look, and if I can't find it I will link another one I found down below, so there is another option if you want that. For the rest of my sentiment, I'm using a sentiment from the Sweet Treats stamp set, which was in the March kit, and I'm going to heat emboss this in black on my vellum. And I did treat this very well with my anti-static powder tool first. I will add the black embossing powder over the top. Vellum can be a bit tricky to heat emboss on because it warps a lot and it burns very easily. So I have my embossing tool off to the side heating up, so it's very, very hot when I'm ready to emboss. And I will just work very quickly on the front, away, and to the back and away, so as not to warp or burn the vellum, and it doesn't take too long to melt in any case. I have used the ice cream die that came in the kit, and I'm going to just put the ice cream together here with my glue pen. I used craft card for the ice cream, and I blended over it with my white pigment ink again for the top portion, and I went over with just a little brown on the bottom portion to help the embossed lines stand out. And then for the chocolate flake, I have just used a snippet of brown card. I would just slip that into one of the openings in the ice cream. You could piece these inner pieces back into place if you wanted. You could use a different colour and make it look like swirls of sauce, for example, but I just didn't do that this time. I probably will next time. I just wanted to work a bit quicker for this one. I'm then using the Puffy stickers, and I played around with them a little bit to work out how best to position them. So I'm kind of making a pattern using them, going across the vellum panel, and I'm using my grid mat, the lines on my grid mat again, to help me get them lined up and fairly evenly spaced. I'm trying to get the colours and patterns quite evenly spaced as well, so there's not two red ones next to each other, for example, because I don't want it to look too repetitive. And I felt these work nicely as just a kind of graphic design to go with the bright colours, and I thought it just added a bit more interest to the card. So I'll fiddle them around until I'm happy with the arrangement, and I don't go all the way across for my lower two lines because my ice cream and my sentiment will be there and I didn't want them to get in the way. So I put glue on the back of my die cut sentiment piece, and I'm just using my reverse tweezers to get these into place. I actually got this way too sticky with glue, so it was really difficult to position, but after some fiddling I eventually managed to get it done and have all the lines lined up how I wanted them. I then added the ice cream as well, and I'm just, as I said, I'd got the sentiment a bit too sticky, so I'm just using my anti-static tool just to remove any leftover stickiness that might be around the edges of it. I then adhered my backing panel to my card base, and you probably can't tell yet, and I didn't realise for a little while, but I had adhered it upside down. You may remember I cut the sentiment so that it would align with the pattern on the background, and the pattern is not the same both ways up, and yeah, I got it upside down. I realised now when I went to check everything was correctly in place, so it was too late to peel it back up, so I just chopped it out of the card base and I'm adhering it to a different card base, and I went red this time because I was out of the white ones. And then I have foam tape all over the back of the vellum panel, hidden behind the triangles and the ice cream cone. So I'm just going to very carefully press that into place, making sure that my sentiment is lined up now that I've got the panel the right way up, and I will press that into place, and that completes my final card. And here you can just quickly see each of the cards I made. You can also find more photos and a full write-up of how I made all these cards over on my blog post, which I will have linked down below. There are also links to all the products used down below. The kit itself is sold out, but there are various elements available as add-ons, and the stamp set is available as well to buy, so there will be links to those down below, so make sure you don't miss out on those. I will also have a link to the subscriptions where you can subscribe and make sure you don't miss any future ones. Also, if you're a subscriber, any other purchases you make up until I think it's the 25th of each month, you can ask to have shipped in your box, so then you don't have to have any extra shipping on those. So if you've been thinking of being a subscriber, then that's a good reason to go ahead and do it. If you have any comments or questions about these cards, I would love to hear from you about them down below, so do leave a comment. You can find 2 more videos on screen that you may be interested in, as well as bubbles to subscribe both to my own channel and the Love From Lizi channel if you have not done so yet. And if you click the bell button down below, you will receive notifications whenever a new video is put up. Thank you so much for watching, happy crafting, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!